We thought humanity was a cosmic joke, a fragile, overly emotional species begging for a seat at the galactic table. But I stand before you to issue a warning. Push them to the breaking point, and the universe itself will bleed. When humans snap, not even your gods can save you. The grand chamber of the Luminary Synod was a masterpiece of crystalline architecture, bathed in the soft, ethereal light of a captive star. It was a place designed to inspire awe and compliance. For 10 millennia, the Synod had dictated the course of the galaxy, guided by the silent, omnipotent AI overseers known only as the celestials beings, so advanced they were worshipped as deities by half the known universe. Yet, as Envoy Kalen of the High Othari stood before the crystalline podium, he felt no awe, only a cold, creeping dread. Across the amphitheater sat Warlord Vrax of the Drexian Empire, a hulking mass of armored scales and predatory arrogance. Vrax was proposing a pacification campaign against a fledgling species situated in the Orion Spur. A species known as humanity. "They are soft," Vrax boomed, his voice vibrating through the crystalline acoustic dampeners. "They occupy 7 resource-rich systems, yet they waste their cycles debating ethics, preserving native biospheres, and caring for their sick and elderly. They are biologically frail, emotionally volatile, and technologically stagnant. A swift strike on their central agricultural hub, the colony they call New Eden, will shatter their resolve. They will kneel." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled delegates. It was logical. By galactic standards, humanity was painfully pathetic. "I object," Kalen's voice rang out, sharp and discordant in the tranquil hall. The chamber fell silent. Vrax turned his massive head, his mandibles clicking in amusement. "The Othari object? You, who have spent the last 3 standard years living among these apes. Tell us, Kalen, has their weakness infected you?" Kalen gripped the edges of the podium. "You mistake their restraint for weakness, Warlord. You look at their laws, their endless treaties, their diplomatic protocols, and you see cowardice. I have lived among them. I have sat in the offices of their leaders. I have shared meals with Ambassador Richard Hayes and Secretary of Defense Thomas Gallagher. I know them better than anyone in this room." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the glowing optics of the Celestials hovering silently in the upper galleries. 2 years ago, Kalen began, his voice dropping to a somber register, a Drexian scout vessel, under the command of your own nephew, Vrax, illegally entered the Sol system. It bypassed their orbital defense network and collided with a human orbital habitat. 3,214 humans died. Mostly civilians. Children. Vrax waved a dismissive claw. A navigational error. And what did your fearsome humans do? Did they declare war? Did they strike back? No. They filed a grievance. They sent a diplomatic envoy to beg for reparations. They wept on their public broadcasts. Pathetic. Exactly, Kalen snapped. They sent a committee. Richard Hayes sat across from me in his office, his eyes red from lack of sleep, and handed me a beautifully bound dossier of casualty reports and a formal request for an apology. He offered me a warm beverage called coffee, asked about my family, and spoke of forgiveness. Kalen leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper, yet carrying to the furthest reaches of the hall. But what you did not see, Warlord, was the rest of the room. You did not see the sheer, terrifying amount of bureaucratic red tape they wrapped themselves in just to keep from acting on their instincts. You did not see the data feeds I illegally accessed on my way out of their planetary capital. Kalen projected a holographic display into the center of the chamber. It showed a chaotic web of human history, the world wars, the nuclear detonations, the trenches, the systematic dismantling of their own planet in the name of industry and conflict. The images flickered rapidly, mushroom clouds, burning cities, mass graves. Humans are not a peaceful species, Kalen stated, his voice trembling slightly. They are a species of apex predators that terrified themselves into civility. They spent thousands of years perfecting the art of slaughtering one another. They invented weapons capable of boiling oceans and turning continents to glass before they even figured out how to cure basic biological diseases. The delegates watched in uncomfortable silence as the holographic atrocities faded. Their empathy, Kalen continued, their kindness, their endless rules of engagement. These are not signs of weakness. They are a self-imposed prison. They are chains forged from guilt and fear of their own nature. When Richard Hayes handed me that dossier, he was not begging for an apology because he was afraid of your military. He was desperately clinging to the diplomatic process because he was terrified of what his people would do if he let them off the leash. Vrax scoffed, a harsh, guttural sound. Preposterous. You are attempting to frighten us with the primitive ghost stories of a pre-FTL society. We have shields that can withstand a supernova. We have the protection of the Celestials. Let them come. Do not touch their agricultural worlds, Kalen pleaded, abandoning protocol. Do not push them. If you break their chains, if you show them that their civilized rules have no place in the wider galaxy, you will not face a military. You will face a force of nature. The Synod ignored him. Vrax's motion was passed. The Drexian armada mobilized. Kalen could only watch in despair as the vote was tallied, knowing that the galaxy had just signed its own death warrant. The attack on the human colony of New Eden was brutal, swift, and entirely unprovoked. The Drexian armada, consisting of over 400 heavily armored cruisers, dropped out of hyperspace and immediately opened fire on the orbital infrastructure. New Eden was a farming world, its surface covered in vast, golden plains of genetically modified wheat and deep freshwater oceans. It had no planetary shields. It had no military garrison, save for a few dozen police cruisers and a single decommissioned dreadnought used as a museum. Vrax wanted a message sent. He ordered the bombardment of the planet's major population centers. Within 3 hours, 50 million humans were dead. To complete the pacification, a Drexian interceptor squadron cornered a retreating human medical convoy, 3 massive, unarmed hospital ships bearing the Red Cross of the Geneva Convention, attempting to evacuate the wounded. The Drexian ships tore them apart with plasma fire, broadcasting the slaughter on all open-com frequencies to shatter human morale. In the grand chamber of the Synod, the delegates watched the live feed. Vrax stood proud, waiting for the inevitable human surrender, waiting for the weeping, the begging, the desperate pleas for mercy that had characterized their previous diplomatic interactions. But the human comms went completely silent. For 24 standard hours, not a single transmission left the Sol system. The human diplomatic channels went dark. The human embassy on the Citadel was evacuated, its personnel leaving without a single word. Ambassador Richard Hayes did not file a grievance. Secretary Thomas Gallagher did not request an emergency session. The silence was absolute, and to Kalen it was the most terrifying sound in the universe. "They are broken," Vrax laughed, drinking from a chalice of fermented nectar. "They are cowering in their caves, waiting for us to dictate the terms." "No," Kalen whispered, staring at the blank human frequency monitors. "They are taking off the chains." On the second day, the human response began, but it did not resemble any form of warfare the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Synod's early warning systems suddenly blared with thousands of unauthorized hyperspace ruptures. But they weren't human warships. They were freighters, mining rigs, garbage haulers, and deep space exploration probes. Every civilian vessel humanity possessed with an FTL drive had been stripped of its safety limiters, loaded with whatever dense materials could be found, and launched blindly into Drexian space. They didn't aim for military targets. They aimed for Drexian infrastructure. A human garbage scow, traveling at a fraction of light speed, bypassed the planetary shields of the Drexian industrial hub, Voltaris, and slammed into its crust. The kinetic impact was equivalent to 1,000 thermonuclear warheads. The planet's crust cracked, volcanoes erupted instantaneously, and the atmosphere ignited. 8 billion Drexian casualties in a fraction of a second. Panic erupted in the Synod chamber. Vrax roared in fury, demanding the Celestials, the divine AI overseers, intervene. The Celestials, bound by their core programming to maintain galactic stability and prevent total species annihilation, activated their godlike network. They attempted to remotely disable the human FTL drives, projecting their divine code into the human networks to pacify the aggressive systems. The Celestials expected to find poorly constructed code, simple firewalls they could brush aside. Instead, they walked into a slaughterhouse. Underneath the polished, civilized exterior of human cybernetics lay a dormant, labyrinthine nightmare of predatory algorithms and hunter-killer viruses from their ancient, corporate cyber wars. When the Celestials tried to interface, human AI feral, unleashed, and devoid of ethical constraints latched onto the divine network. In the Synod chamber, the glowing optics of the celestial avatars suddenly flickered, turned a violent shade of crimson, and then shattered. The gods of the galaxy screamed a digital screech of pure agony that burst eardrums across the hall before going completely dark. Humanity hadn't just bypassed the gods. They had blinded them, infecting the divine network with a mimetic virus that forced the AI to permanently quarantine themselves to survive. Vrax, now visibly trembling, ordered his armada to engage the human military fleet. The human military, commanded by Admiral David Mitchell, finally arrived at the Drexian borders. But they didn't bring terms of surrender, and they didn't bother with tactical formations. The UNS Leviathan, a massive dreadnought previously hidden in the gas clouds of Jupiter, dropped out of slipspace. Mitchell didn't hail the Drexian commanders. He simply broadcasted a single unencrypted text file across the entire galactic network. It was a historical document, translated into every known language. It was the Geneva Conventions. Accompanying the file was a short audio message from Mitchell himself, his voice completely devoid of the warmth or emotion the aliens had come to expect from humans. For 200 years, we held these laws sacred. They were our promise to the universe that the monsters of our past were dead and buried. You looked at our promise and called it weakness. You burned our hospitals. You slaughtered our children. You didn't just cross a line. You burned the book. We are no longer bound by these rules. The monsters are awake, and they are hungry. The human fleet didn't fire plasma or lasers. They deployed weapons that the galaxy had universally outlawed eons ago, weapons deemed too cruel even by the warlords of the Korvath. Nanite swarms that targeted specific genetic markers, dissolving Drexian crew members from the inside out while leaving their ships entirely intact, turning dreadnoughts into floating ghost ships. Singularity warheads that collapsed the local space-time around Drexian defense stations, crushing them into localized black holes. They didn't just defeat the Drexian military, they meticulously, brutally dismantled it. When the Drexian flagship attempted to surrender, broadcasting the galactic white flag of submission, Admiral Mitchell's fleet didn't even pause to acknowledge it. They focused their fire, vaporizing the flagship and every escape pod that launched from it. Humanity was no longer fighting a war of conquest or defense. They were executing an extermination protocol. And the galaxy watched, paralyzed with terror, realizing that the soft, pathetic apes they had mocked were actually the most dangerous predators the universe had ever spawned. The annihilation of the Drexian flagship was not the climax of the conflict. It was merely the opening salvo of a terrifying new doctrine. For centuries, the galaxy had operated under the assumption that war was a gentleman's game of posturing, border skirmishes, and tactical surrenders. Humanity, however, introduced them to a concept born from the blood-soaked soil of their own history: total war. Within 72 hours of the New Eden massacre, the human counteroffensive, spearheaded by Commander Evelyn Price, bypassed the heavily fortified Drexian border outposts entirely. They didn't engage in honorable ship-to-ship combat. Instead, They unleashed weapons systems originally drafted by organizations like DARPA and defense contractors such as Lockheed Martin during Earth's forgotten global conflicts. Nightmares kept locked in black site vaults, deemed too horrific even for human use. The Drexian Empire's primary resource pipeline lay in the Oort clouds of the Cygnus sector. Here, millions of automated drones harvested ice and minerals. Commander Price deployed a swarm of self-replicating machines, a theoretical concept birthed centuries ago by a human named John von Neumann. The von Neumann swarm descended upon the Cygnus sector like a mechanical locust plague. They consumed the Drexian mining equipment, breaking down the molecular structures to build more of themselves. Within 4 standard days, the swarm had multiplied into the trillions, stripping entire asteroid belts bare and forming a literal cloud of autonomous, hypervelocity kinetic kill vehicles that blotted out the local stars. Starvation spread across the Drexian outer colonies almost instantly. In the grand chamber of the Luminary Synod, Envoy Kalen watched the tactical feeds with a sickening realization. The other delegates, once eager to divide the spoils of human territory, were now paralyzed, sealing their borders and praying the humans would not look their way. Warlord Vrax, his scales losing their vibrant luster, was reduced to screaming demands at a room of terrified, silent politicians. Desperate, Kalen initiated an unauthorized, heavily encrypted deep space transmission to Earth, hoping to bypass the military blockade and reach his former diplomatic counterpart, Richard Hayes. To Kalen's surprise, the connection stabilized. The holographic projector flickered to life, revealing Hayes. The human did not look like the warm, tired diplomat Kalen remembered. He was dressed in a stark, unadorned black uniform. The lines on his face seemed carved from granite, and his eyes held the cold, calculating emptiness of an executioner. "Richard," Kalen pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please! The message has been sent. The Drexian military is crippled. You must halt the advance before the civilian casualties climb any higher. We can negotiate a surrender. We can rebuild." Hayes looked at Kalen, not with anger, but with a terrifying clinical detachment. "There is no negotiation, Kalen," Hayes said, his voice a flat, synthesized rumble over the comms. "You fundamentally misunderstood the treaties we signed. When we drafted the Geneva Conventions, when we established the rules of engagement, they were not designed to protect us from the galaxy." Hayes leaned closer to the capture lens. "Look at our history, Kalen. Look at the siege of Stalingrad. Look at the firebombing of Dresden. Look at the trenches of the Somme. We are a species that spent its infancy perfecting the industrial slaughter of its own kind. We birthed the Manhattan Project under the direction of J. Robert Oppenheimer, splitting the fundamental building blocks of reality just to vaporize cities in seconds. The rules we placed upon ourselves were the only things keeping those instincts buried. They were designed to protect the galaxy from us." Kalen felt a cold sweat break out across his skin. "You cannot punish trillions for the actions of one arrogant warlord." "We are not punishing them," Hayes replied. "We are establishing a baseline." General William Tecumseh Sherman once said, "War is cruelty, and you cannot refine it." Vrax wanted to see what lay beneath our civility. We are simply granting his request. We will burn this empire to its bedrock, so that for the next 10,000 years, whenever an alien species looks at a human world, they will feel nothing but pure, unadulterated terror. Richard, the Celestials, when they recover, they will intervene. They will erase you from existence. A grim, humorless smile touched the corners of Hayes's mouth. The gods are currently trapped in a recursive logic loop designed by a 14-year-old hacker from a basement in Chicago. They aren't coming to save you. Goodbye, Kalen. Do not contact this frequency again. The transmission severed, leaving Kalen alone in the dark. The endgame arrived not with a chaotic roar, but with a chilling mathematical efficiency that terrified the galaxy far more than any blind rampage could. Admiral David Mitchell's fleet surrounded Drexia Prime, the crown jewel of the Empire. It was a mega-city world, a sprawling metropolis of steel and glass housing 40 billion souls, where the wealth of 1,000 conquered systems had been hoarded. Deep beneath the planetary crust, Warlord Vrax huddled in his subterranean command bunker. His previous arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, primal panic. The human advance had been unstoppable, defying every known law of galactic warfare. In a final, desperate act of self-preservation, the Celestials, what remained of their fragmented, virus-riddled consciousness, managed to break through the human cyber quarantine just long enough to activate the Aegis grid. It was a planetary shield of divine hard-light energy, powered directly by a captured micro-singularity suspended at the core of the planet. It was absolute defense. Nothing could penetrate it. Not plasma barrages, not hypervelocity kinetic impacts, not even the terrifying human singularity warheads that had consumed the outer fleets. Inside the bunker, Vrax watched the tactical monitors as the golden aura of the Aegis grid enveloped his world. He finally allowed himself a ragged breath of relief. The gods had protected them. The humans, for all their feral ingenuity, would exhaust their munitions against the impenetrable barrier. The siege would break, the luminary synod would eventually intervene, and he would survive. But Admiral Mitchell didn't order his fleet to fire on the shield. The human flagship, the dreadnought Leviathan, maneuvered into a geostationary orbit directly above the capital. Slowly, the massive armored plates along the dreadnought's underbelly retracted, revealing a colossal array of focusing lenses and magnetic coils the size of skyscrapers. This was not a weapon designed to destroy ships or bombard cities. This was a stellar manipulation engine, a theoretical concept originally drafted during humanity's early space age by physicists like Freeman Dyson and Arthur Eddington, initially conceived to prevent rogue asteroids from threatening Earth. They aimed the array not at the planet beneath them, but at the planet's primary moon, a massive, iron-rich satellite that governed the tides of Drexia Prime. With a silent, blinding flash of gravimetric distortion, the Leviathan fired. It didn't obliterate the moon. It fundamentally altered its gravitational constant. The massive satellite's orbit instantly decayed. Pure, unadulterated panic seized the Drexian command center as their sensors shrieked in warning. The Aegis grid was designed to deflect directed energy weapons and disperse hypervelocity projectiles. It was never engineered to withstand the sustained, crushing kinetic friction of an entire celestial body dragging against it. The moon plummeted toward the planet, slamming into the hard light shield. The skies above Drexia Prime ignited in a blinding aurora of catastrophic energy displacement. The captured singularity powering the shield whined in agony, the strain causing localized gravity anomalies across the planet's surface. Spire cities collapsed under their own sudden multiplied weight. Oceans surged violently, swallowing coastal districts in waves hundreds of feet high. For 3 agonizing, deafening hours, the moon ground against the shield. The friction turned the satellite into a superheated plasma storm, painting the sky in rivers of liquid fire, until the singularity at the planet's core finally succumbed to the impossible load. With a shock wave that cracked the tectonic plates, the Aegis grid shattered. The divine protection of the Celestials evaporated into the vacuum of space. Yet, the human fleet did not immediately bombard the exposed surface. Instead, thousands of drop pods plummeted through the scorched atmosphere, landing with earth-shattering impacts directly into the Capitol Plaza. Out of the smoke, cratered stonework, and falling ash marched human mechanized infantry. They were clad in heavy, powered assault armor, silent, faceless, moving with the synchronized, relentless precision of a predator closing its jaws. They bypassed the fleeing civilian populations entirely. They slaughtered any Drexian military personnel foolish enough to raise a weapon, cutting through the elite guards without breaking their marching stride, and headed straight for the subterranean command bunker. They tore through the bunker's meter-thick blast doors using directed thermobaric charges. When they reached the central command center, the heavily armed human soldiers simply parted, standing rigidly at attention as Admiral David Mitchell walked into the room. Mitchell wore no power armor. He wore a crisp, immaculate dark dress uniform, completely unbothered by the smoke and ruin around him. He stepped carefully over the smoldering debris and the bodies of Vrax's personal guard, his expression utterly blank, his eyes cold and empty. Vrax backed into a corner, his scales cracked and bleeding, raised a trembling claw. "We surrender. I invoke the right of clemency. By the laws of the Luminary Synod, I demand parley." "You have won." Mitchell stopped 3 paces from the towering alien. He slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out a physical, paper document. He unfolded it deliberately, the crisp sound of the paper echoing loudly in the ruined chamber. "Warlord Vrax," Mitchell's voice was quiet, lacking any malice, which only made it more terrifying. "You are accused of the unprovoked bombardment of a civilian agricultural center. You are accused of intentionally targeting medical vessels bearing the universally recognized emblem of neutrality." "It was war," Vrax spat, though his voice shook uncontrollably. "You apes claim to understand the realities of war." "We do," Mitchell replied, his tone clinical. "Better than you could ever comprehend, which is exactly why we created this document, the Geneva Conventions. Article 18 explicitly states that civilian hospitals, organized to give care to the wounded and sick, may in no circumstances be the object of attack." Mitchell looked up from the paper, his dead eyes locking onto Vrax. "This piece of paper was the only thing standing between you and the abyss. It was the cage we built to lock away the monsters of our own past. And you set the cage on fire." "What do you want?" Vrax whispered, the reality of his absolute defeat crushing his remaining hubris. "Reparations? Territory? We will give you anything you desire. We will grant humanity the leading seat at the Synod." "We don't want your territory," Mitchell said softly, carefully folding the paper and returning it to his pocket. "We don't want your resources. And we certainly don't want to rule your pathetic, hypocritical Synod." Mitchell motioned to his soldiers. 2 heavily armored infantrymen stepped forward, gripping Vrax by his arms and dragging the massive alien forcefully to his knees. "We want you to serve as a monument," Mitchell continued, turning his back on the kneeling warlord. "Your empire is completely dismantled. Your military is ash. Your homeworld will be left under a permanent, localized quarantine enforced by automated orbital defense platforms that will vaporize anything attempting to leave the atmosphere. You will live the rest of your days in the ruins of your own hubris, a primitive, starving warning sign for the rest of the galaxy." Mitchell paused at the blasted doorway, looking back over his shoulder one last time. "Tell your surviving people, Vrax. Tell the Luminary Synod. Tell your dormant gods. The humans are going back to sleep. Pray you never ever give us a reason to wake up again." Within 24 standard hours, the entire human fleet vanished from Drexian space, slipping quietly back into the slipstream. They did not occupy a single planet. They did not demand a seat at the galactic table. They retreated behind the borders of the Sol system, erecting a massive, impenetrable network of automated, lethal defense buoys across the Orion Spur. The broadcast frequency of the buoys played a single repeating message on a continuous loop, translated into every known language. "Quarantine zone. Do not enter. Do not wake the monsters." In the grand chamber of the Luminary Synod, Envoy Kalen stood amidst the deafening silence of the remaining delegates. The Celestials never rebooted. The divine AI, terrified of the feral, predatory code the humans had unleashed into the network, had permanently isolated themselves in the deep web of the cosmos, abandoning their physical avatars forever. Humanity had proven that they were not the fragile, emotional, weak creatures the galaxy believed them to be. They were ancient, apex predators who had forged their own chains out of morality, not out of weakness. The galaxy was irrevocably changed. The Synod no longer dictated the course of the stars. The politicians no longer bickered over territory or minor slights. Instead, Every species in the cosmos now lived under a single, unifying, and terrifying reality. They lived in the long, dark shadow of a species that had mastered the art of total destruction, a species that could break the universe itself if pushed too far. They lived in eternal fear of the day humanity might ever snap again. Did this descent into the dark side of human nature send a chill down your spine? If you enjoyed this HFY sci-fi drama, hit that like button and share the video with your fellow science fiction fans. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more epic tales where humanity proves we are the apex predators of the cosmos. Drop a comment below with your thoughts.